Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 6th edition of TalkDeath, Canadian Funeral Law, with Nathan Romagnoli and Janet McCausland. Hi, Nathan.
Hello, everybody.
And hi, Janet.
Hello.
So we're going to start with some quick introductions and then get right into your questions. So if you're on Twitter, Facebook, or watching this on YouTube, send us over your questions right now with hashtag TalkDeath, and Julian is standing by to send them over to us immediately. So first of all, I'm Mandy, and I'm the founder of Keeper. We are a social memorial website where you can store and share all the photos, videos, and stories of your loved ones for free and interact with the Keeper community. Our Keeper mobile app gives you exact directions to a monument in a cemetery, including green cemeteries. And it has a really cool function where you can just take a photo of a monument and the memorial will come up on your phone so that you can discover all the interesting life stories within a cemetery. So go ahead and download it now on Android and iOS for free. And of course, send us a good review.
So my name is Jeremy and I'm the communications director here at Keeper. I'm also a PhD candidate in religion and anthropology. My focus is on the intersections between religion, death, and technology. Now, for those of you who are watching your first Talk Death event, this is the chance for you, the general public, to ask members of the death profession and community your questions. And we noticed that there was a huge divide between the public and professionals, especially considering that most of you are only ever going to encounter a death professional in a funeral setting. So the ultimate goal of Talk Death then is to promote death positivity by creating an open and honest discussion about this huge taboo and fear in Western culture. And on that note, we'd also like to say hello to everyone from our local Death Cafe chapter who are watching this live.
So today's topic, it came up because, if ever Jeremy and I were at a social gathering or attending a death cafe or talking to family, the same questions seem to pop up. People ask us if they can be buried in their backyard, if they can have their ashes spread in a local park, or have a home funeral. So funeral law, it's really complex and people have nowhere really to turn. But lucky for us, today we have two experts who are here to answer all of your questions. So first of all, Nathan has been in the funeral profession for over 16 years, both in British Columbia and Ontario. Nathan is the current owner and director of Eco Funeral in Ontario, and they provide life-centered options for people, including green burial, unique celebrations, and budget-friendly arrangements. So you can visit them at ecofuneral.ca and take a look at all their awesome services.
Janet, she has a BA from Western University and an MA from the University of London. She has owned her own consulting business and is currently the director for Prince's Operation Entrepreneur, or POE. It's a program that provides the men and women who have served our country with the education, mentoring, and tools that they need to start a business. Janet was also director at Green Living Enterprises, where she co-founded the Natural Burial Association, as well as the Green Toronto Awards, the City of Toronto's Environmental Awards of Excellence. So Nathan, is there anything here that we missed or anything that you would like to add?
No, that's a great introduction. Thank you so much for that. Just exactly as Mandy said, there's a huge scale of information that was designed on our website that's available for the general public to help educate them and truly become empowered as consumers going through the death care process, whether they're pre-planning or looking for something after somebody's passed away. So definitely suggest that you check that out at ecofuneral.ca. Right now, I'm just sitting in our new Toronto administrative office, where we are just in the process of setting things up right now. So we've expanded our range of services out into the Toronto area to help serve more people.
Great. And Janet, you have quite the impressive resume. Is there anything that we missed or anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I think it's kind of fun that one of the things that inspired me about burials and working in this field was going to the Normandy beaches and seeing all the war cemeteries there. And so it's kind of like it's almost come full circle as I now work with veterans. And this past weekend, I did a Wounded Warriors ride, which was along the Highway of Heroes in Ontario from Trenton to Toronto, and looking at all the memorials along the way. So it's sort of the memorial part of it, the green part of it, all of those things sort of come together for me. to do this work with natural burials.
Awesome.
Great.
So, I mean, on that note, our first question, I think, which would be important for the context of this, is can you, Janet, let us know what the Burial Association does and how what it does can be applicable to Canadians?
Sure. Well, the Natural Burial Association was begun probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and our goal was to educate Canadians about greener burial options. And at the time, it was really challenging because there were no natural burials. There was no call to action. We couldn't say, hey guys, you think it's a good idea, now this is then what you need to go and do. So when we were talking to cemeteries, they told us, well, there's no demand. So then after that, we had to say, okay, well, we need to create some demand. And then our other goal was we wanted to actually set up a natural burial ground in Ontario for zoning and for a variety of other reasons. It didn't actually come to pass, but we're now, our goal is really to, it's the conservation burial side of it. So the conservation side of it to preserve land with, in combination with a natural burial ground.
Okay.
Awesome.
So Nathan, at Graveyard Picnic on Instagram wants to know how many provinces or territories currently have green burial spaces? And this applies to Janet as well.
Yeah.
Sure, it's a great question. So the movement towards natural or more green burials is still relatively emerging throughout Canada, as Janet certainly could speak to. Truly and quite honestly, there are some that are emerging as we speak, trying to sort of wean their way through the system of becoming more populated and more publicly aware. The first natural burial ground in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, was Royal Oak Burial Park in the Victoria area of British Columbia, which is a very beautiful place. I had the pleasure of burying a number of individuals within that cemetery when I worked in British Columbia. And quite honestly, that precedence that was set at Royal Oak Burial Park moved east towards Ontario and beyond and such. And currently in Ontario, there are just a handful of natural burial sites. One specifically, which is currently emerging as we speak in the Jordan, Ontario area. A very beautiful space just at the base of the Niagara Escarpment. So quite honestly, there's less than a handful in Ontario.
I'll add to the Ontario. The first natural burial ground in Ontario was in Cobourg. It was actually a pioneer cemetery, so 100-year-old cemetery, and they added an area adjacent to it, and also Mount Pleasant group of cemeteries in the GTA also has two cemeteries, Duff and Grove and Meadowvale, where it's sort of it's set off in its own area, but they also offer natural burial.
Cool. Do any of you know about Quebec? I believe there was one, but it's really I'm really uncertain about it, and I think Quebec is gonna maybe be the wild card in today's discussion. So we might even have to do a Quebec-specific one, honestly.
I'll add also to the BC. There's also, all the cemeteries so far, the natural burial grounds have been existing cemeteries that have added green spaces. In Devon Island, Island in BC. That's the first one in Canada, I believe, that was set up specifically to be a natural burial ground. I also had a quick Google search the other day, and so it said that the city of Edmonton was doing something. So I'm not really current on what else is happening in Canada, but I know that there are memorial groups who are like, hey, how do we do this? How do we get started? All across Canada. So in terms of memorial places, memorial societies are good places to get connected with other interested folks.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a big question as well is, for example, some people or some provinces or even, smaller cities that want a space like this and don't have access or don't know if they can have access. Do any of you know, how this can happen or how anyone can try to initiate having a form of green cemetery in their city?
I think, quite honestly, the first step would be to lobby local government bodies and or funeral organizations that might be present in specific provinces or even more locally. These things are obviously very natural in their development, very organic in their own development. And so on a very grassroots scale, the need needs to come from, interested community members, influential people within communities who can then approach their local funeral organizations to then push the funeral industry on a whole, whether that be funeral home related services or cemetery and crematorium related services, to expand their range and then seek the legislative requirements that are needed to do so, or even to set those precedents on their own. There was a question a little bit earlier, or some topic discussion regarding the province of Quebec, and we've actually at ECO been contacted by a number of parties throughout the province of Quebec, which leads me to believe that truly nothing is set and quite organized within the province, and that they're perhaps struggling to figure out how they may be able to do that. And so I really do believe that connecting on a very grassroots scale and then moving upwards through any form of government body, local MPs and such, would be able to push that movement. As Janet mentioned also, the Mount Pleasant group, which operates heavily within the Toronto area here, have opened 2 of the natural burial grounds within 2 existing cemeteries. And so when you deal with organizations such as the Mount Pleasant group, who does have a lot of influence within their community, whether that be financially speaking or otherwise, these people who have some power do have the ability to influence their own communities.
I think you might have answered my next question in your response there, but what do you think is the biggest stopping block for more green burial spaces in Canada? Yeah,
Janet, what have you seen to be some of the most difficult hurdles?
I've experienced this firsthand in terms of, and the issue is zoning. So to be zoned, a cemetery, the reason why you can't bury someone in your backyard is you need to bury someone who in an area that is zoned cemetery. So it can either be an open space or industrial. So, and also within the Greater Toronto Area, there are so many areas like the Greenbelt and the Moraine and all these things that are protected areas that they will not allow an industrial space on. So, while our argument is that, a green cemetery will be preserving space, but under the law, a cemetery has to be in an industrial area, because it has a parking lot, because it has, services that come around the cemetery, not just the burials. So we had, and these townships, the cemetery that we were looking at was in the King Township, and they have town planning that go 10 and 15 years. So to change the plan is you need really deep pockets. You need a long-term vision. And so that's why the cemeteries so far, except the one in BC, have been it's existing cemetery land already, and then you add a burial, natural burial around it.
It seems like that might be the biggest stumbling block for Quebec, for example, where you have these sort of institutional, jurisdictional issues that's causing friction between the funeral profession and consumers. Let's say that might be a stumbling block for green burial. And the insistence that cemetery has to have a parking lot, it has to have certain elements that will then be missing potentially from a green burial space.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of the sites, the sites all need to, if you wanted to start up your own cemetery, it needs to be approved by the Minister of Health. It needs, there are all the different things that you need, but first and foremost is the zoning.
Okay, interesting. And I know that a lot of places have succeeded, or a lot of provinces, or mostly states actually, have succeeded in having green cemetery spaces, but they're within a regular cemetery. So I think a lot of that is basically from consumer requests saying, going straight to the cemeterians and saying, we want a green space. And then they're just taking, their regular land that they might put vaults in and make them green. But it's sort of, that fine line between, it is a green cemetery space in that, there's no embalming fluid and there's no vaults, but some people want, to actually be in a reserve, in a forested area, somewhere that, isn't your typical cemetery space. So that's the tough part, I think.
There is truly a big difference between the discussion around natural versus green burial also, or green and natural cemeteries. So, people always speak of the shades of green and such, and this does definitely come into this realm as well. So the existing areas in some of the more corporate cemeteries are certainly natural in elements, but do have pretty strict limitations with respect to how green their burials can actually be. So, for example, the majority of them do require the use of what's called a lowering device, which is really a man-made structure that would go over an open hole that allows for a body or a casket, for that matter, to be lowered, which in certain capacities takes away from elements of the green nature. Some of the natural burial grounds also will continue to use a backhoe, for example, to dig the earth, as opposed to one thinking that you might be able to dig the grave yourself, even by a shovel. So it is quite variable, and certainly a big difference between the element of conservation type burial and natural or green.
Okay. I think we should probably get to back to our questions now. That was a great discussion. So Mark P. Leclerc on YouTube is asking, being Canadian myself, I am just curious what provinces allow for home funerals, and he put / burials, but I think that those are two very different things. So maybe we can address, home funerals and potentially home burials. Do any provinces allow it at this point?
I think I can speak to the home-based funeral scenario in that Ontario has some unique regulations that do not prohibit individuals, residents of Ontario, from handling their loved ones who pass away on their own. So the home-based funeral movement, which is truly coming at us at a relatively rapid scale with respect to us being pushed and prodded by the general public, is certainly here. And so we're working with the public who inquire about those things to assist them through the process of a home-based funeral, which can allow for family members, relatives, loved ones alike to almost entirely address the scope of caring for their loved one and memorializing them in their homes. There are certainly regulations in Ontario, as an example, that need to be addressed. For example, the common task of registering a death with the province of Ontario. Nothing states that a funeral director, such as myself or many others, are needing to go through that process. A family can certainly do that on their own. So we are in a process of trying to broach that topic to the general public, to address needs for families to care for their loved ones at home, perhaps with a little bit of guidance from us. And that's also where a number of other death type professionals come into play. Death midwives, doulas, and things like this within the home-based funeral movement.
Right. So that brings up a few things. So essentially at this point, Ontario, we know that yes, you can bring a body at home, wash a body at home, have a viewing at home. I know in Quebec, there's something like an 18-hour limitation before a body has to be embalmed by law, which is basically leaves it virtually impossible to have a home viewing. But it's also been said that those laws are not really, policed, so to speak. And I think you might have to find a funeral director that would be willing to accommodate. But in Ontario, you're saying that there is not necessarily a limit before the body has to be embalmed?
Truly, with respect to home-based funerals, I mean, the reality is helping families understand, what embalming is, or what any form of preparation to a body is, why that benefits the body, or perhaps why it may benefit the family. Communicating these realities of changes to our human body after we pass away, I think satisfies the needs to help families understand when it's appropriate to make the final disposition of their loved one, or allow somebody to then take over the task of, say, delivering them to a crematorium or bringing them to a cemetery. A lot of this misunderstanding, I think, truly comes from a lack of education with respect to how long could you keep a deceased human body in your home? Do you need to refrigerate them? Do you need to have embalming take place? Helping to educate the public is the key in empowering them to make responsible decisions, I think.
Janet, are you seeing home funerals and natural burial being complementary?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to recommend a movie called A Will for the Woods. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, in it, it's a very touching story of a man who, doesn't want to die in a hospital. He's a doctor himself, and he dies at home, and it's very moving. And then over the course of the movie, they talk about how he is fighting for changes so that he can have a natural burial. So I certainly see them as complementary, and the death midwifery movement in terms of helping people at home, and it is a milestone. And that's sort of, we spoke a little bit about religion as well, and so it is a milestone in people's bodies. So you do want to have some kind of service, some kind of commemoration, and I think all of those together, can certainly go hand in hand if people want to do it in a more natural way.
Okay. So Nathan, just maybe to clarify something for our viewers. So are you saying that you have also performed, or you have experience with performing home funerals where the body is embalmed? So is that essentially, have you done both? Because we know, for those of you who have maybe not heard of home funerals before, the idea is that you can take the body at home. Often people who do home funerals, they do not always want embalming. So there's options to keep the body on generally as dry ice, or certain types of freezer packs and things like that for a day to 2 days, up to 3 days, I think. So Nathan, are you also seeing families embalming the body and then having the service at home to have like a more personalized experience?
Yes, that's certainly the case. So, I mean, we take the scale of educating our families very seriously. So, though we try to focus on more natural elements or just general alternatives that are positive to the traditional funeral industry, with respect to caring for people's bodies, when you educate the general public about why, again, you may prepare somebody's body in certain capacities, whether that's fully embalming them or not, we really find that the families will make their own decisions with what's appropriate for them. Do we find it responsible to help the families understand the changes that will occur if we do not prepare one's body by means of embalming? Yes, we do. So, if a family makes that responsible decision on their own, then certainly that's their choice. The occurrences that will happen after death can be coached through with a family to understand how they can deal with some of those changes that not necessarily will be found unpleasant. Educating them will help them understand the reality of it, and perhaps tap into a little bit of their emotional side of a loss, to bring the whole scale of the loss to a full scope of reality. I mean, we do find that families who forego preparation of one's body, I think, have a truer sense of the reality of their loved one's death, because it's not hidden from them. There's nothing masked, and that they can be fully aware of what it is that their loved one's body is doing through the process of nature.
Okay, cool. Actually, let's ask this question that came in, because it's very relevant to what we were just talking about.
So Wallace Finch would like to know, is there support in the industry, in the profession, for death doulas?
Janet, do you know, have you encountered this at all?
I don't know about death doulas. I mean, in any different than death midwives. I assume it's sort of the same thing.
Yes.
I know that there is training available in the U.S. I haven't really heard of anything available in Canada. I do know that there's actually at the in Mississauga they have a big event, like a community event coming up at the Unitarian Church, where they're inviting all sorts of different professionals, and I believe there's one coming to that. So yeah, so that's sort of what I know about the death midwifery.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What about your experience, Nathan? Have you worked with any death doulas or death midwives, and maybe other fellow funeral directors, how they feel about it?
It's interesting because a lot of funeral directors, traditional funeral directors that have sort of grown up through the process we do in Ontario to be a funeral director, have branched into that that side of becoming sort of death coaches and such. So I've had a number of discussions with specific individuals that have tried to broach the topic and have tried to figure out how do we. There's legal limitations with respect to death midwifery and doulas and such in Ontario. So we've been approached to try to figure out how they can bridge the gap between what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and then how perhaps we together could be able to facilitate that to bring a family a more wholesome experience. So what Janet touched on, a lot of education coming from the United States. Some of it is peaking up north to where we are here in Canada, and that's nice to see. We need these doors to be knocked on and doors to be opened to our own society, and we need like-minded professionals that grasp the concept of positive alternatives, again, back into our communities and figure out how to work with our legislation to allow these things to be done.
Yeah. For those of you, just to finish off with that point, we do have a great group of death midwives or death doulas. There's been some questions about what the term would be, but either way, Cassandra Yonder is an awesome woman, and she seems to be really pioneering this movement in Canada, especially. So just look her up, and there's a death midwife group on Facebook and a website, and they do training. And so if this is something that you're interested in, she's the person to talk to. And there's a really great group surrounding this at the moment, and hopefully it will grow. And I think our hope is for sure that death doulas and funeral professionals are able to work together to serve families, and because I feel like everyone has a really important role, and we'll see how that plays out over the next few years.
Yes, just a quick point. Go ahead, Jenny.
So just to add to Nathan's point, in terms of people asking questions, and that to me was the biggest thing that I found when I was working on this, is that people, as you said, encounter death once or twice in their life. They have to deal with it. They go to the funeral home around the corner, the one that they've been to before or that's close by, and they haven't necessarily done their homework. So there's so much more available online, and communities like this one are helping to really educate people, which is terrific. But like the embalming fluid, for example, there are more environmentally friendly options, that aren't as harmful to the person who is preparing the body. Who's asking questions about that? We just sort of take it as given that, and I think that's why there are so many regulations in the industry. But you have to ask questions, you have to do your homework, shop around, and it sort of seems like not necessarily tacky or the thing to do, but ask questions about price, ask questions, until you get a really good answer, that you're comfortable with and you think that's going to work for your family.
Great.
So moving on, Nicola Finch on Facebook asked, and this is similar to a question we spoke about, so maybe it'll just be a quick response. But he wants to know if I accept the scattering or burial of ashes of the deceased in my own rural property in BC. Is there a point where I would have to be registered as a graveyard? So I think we're really talking about cremains and not an actual body. So I think that this is different. There's probably a lot more leeway. Does anyone know about perhaps BC laws or in general in Canada about doing this on your own property?
I think you can scatter ashes. What I know about ashes is if it's on Crown land, you can do it on Crown land, which also includes lakes and things like that. But they also ask, like, a lot of people, like, the remains can come in a bag or with a tag or something, and a lot of people sort of like leave that behind as garbage sort of by accident. So that would just be a little warning. And if you do it on private property, it's really, you just need to get the permission of the landowner.
Okay.
What about if you want to leave your ashes at a Blue Jays game?
Probably not, because it's private property.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's really good to know, because I think, do you remember in the States if you were allowed to scatter on your own property? I think your own property was okay in the States.
There was a lot of don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, that's really what it was, especially if it's like, on a beach or something. So that would be interesting as well. So like, let's say it's a public park or a beach that's not necessarily Crown land. Could you get in trouble with a policeman?
Well, I know that there are some parks that sort of call themselves memorial type parks where you actually you're charged to be able to scatter ashes. So it's a more of a sort of a transaction, and I guess you would have some kind of service or something like that. I mean, there are also all those crazy things where, you can be made into a pencil and that's shot into space and get, mixed up in cement that goes down to the bottom of the sea, so if you're a big Blue Jays fan, I'm sure that there are, ways to be memorialized for your team.
Well, funny that you mentioned that, because on Instagram, NYT Marriott. Anyways, I'm sorry I butchered your handle. They would like to be shot into space when they die. Is that something you can legally do in Canada?
Or Nathan, have you ever had a request for this? I know that a lot of these are private companies that are allowing families to do this. Have you heard of this yet?
I think that, just given the population of the States being so much greater than the population of Canada, a lot of these requests come out of the United States. And so we certainly keep tabs on trends that are occurring there. Exactly the thing that Janet said about becoming a coral reef in, the Florida Keys, or being shot into fireworks. I was looking up a company, in fact, the other day, out of the United States that does that exact thing. You can provide a small portion of your loved one's cremated body to be placed into specific colors and specific designs of fireworks at an obvious heavy fee. But these things are doable. And really, again, it's the public that demands these things, and then creative business people find these abilities to make these things work. I have a quick point with respect to the Crown land scenario that we were just speaking of before. It's an interesting element on how local municipalities and otherwise provincially have responded to the need from the public to not necessarily have to conform to traditional cemeteries as places of final rest. So, for example, within the Golden Horseshoe here where we are, Bronte Creek Provincial Park, which is an extremely large park, a very beautiful place, not too far just off the shore, if you will, from Lake Ontario, responded to the ability to allow public to scatter their loved ones' cremated bodies into the provincial park with a complete ability to do so. And we have participated in creating unique experiences where we've taken families on hikes into the woods to choose a particular place that speaks to them, and essentially had an impromptu off-site funeral. So there are government bodies and otherwise that are responding to the needs of the public. And I think that Bronte Creek will be very instrumental in expanding the other municipalities and other parks and such to allow this to take place in a safe way.
Janet, is your association getting requests from national parks and provincial parks, or is that, is there any partnerships occurring there?
Yeah, no, we tend to be the proactive ones. There aren't a lot of people coming to us for advice or information or anything like that. Although we have had, the occasional cemetery come to us, asking about, standards, which I think the Green Burial Council in the U.S. is doing such a good job on, in terms of the levels and, what we spoke about before, the real, deep green conservation burials versus, kind of greening up, not being embalmed or not using a casket or hardwood or all those sorts of things.
Okay,
Awesome.
great.
So this one is John Arden from the blog, who wants to know, or has a statement that it worries me that so few people know what to do after a death. What steps should or could Canadians take to better know their rights in Canada?
Janet, maybe you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing is talking to your family. That's making your wishes known ahead of time, especially for a green burial. You know, Aunt Sally has died, and so no one is going to say, hey, like, let's try this. You know, it really needs to be people who choose ahead of time that they would like to be naturally buried. There was a great ad for giving donor, organ donation, and it was like, if it was a 30-second ad, they spoke for 5 seconds and then said, okay, now go ahead and talk to the person beside you and actually let your wishes be known. Because it isn't something that people talk about, and there is that taboo around death. So really being clear about what you want is definitely the easiest way to make sure your wishes are carried out for a green burial.
Okay, Nathan, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Something I find extremely important, we see on almost a daily basis in our line of work when we help families with respect to helping the families understand their own rights. It is definitely key for families and people who will die. We as human beings, we die, to take responsibility for ourselves in terms of knowing the legalities of what happens after we die. So we get a number of very, very unique requests from families that are a little bit outside of the box, and ensuring that we are able to do so to carry out those wishes is contingent on us being able to take direction from someone's representative after they've died. So a huge misunderstanding surrounding wills and why one should have a will, specifically in the province of Ontario, is becoming exceedingly troubling for us, because we find ourselves unable to fulfill a lot of, say, spoken or written wishes of a deceased person due to the fact that they've not done their diligence to simply name an executor of their will that will allow us to fulfill those wishes. A huge misunderstanding about wills and why we need to see proof of executorship when someone dies is the fact that, well, my loved one had nothing. He does not have money. There's no assets. And we try to help people, particularly in imminent death situations or pre-planning, know that they've got to nail down a will, and a will should be made by everybody, no matter whether we have 1 cent to our name or nothing at all, simply so that we can begin to facilitate the wishes of the deceased person.
So what I'm getting from both of you is that pre-planning is really what's important here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. You're right, Janet, in that you're not going to just have someone pass away and unless they spoke to you, you're not going to say, oh, hey, let's have a home funeral or green burial. These are the type of services that really need to be pre-planned. And it's something that, you could even start looking into yourself and arranging yourself, hopefully that you're in enough health to be able to do that if you know what you'd like. So, and of course it starts at knowing what you want, speaking to your family, but then I think it's also becoming very clear that there is a lack of information for Canadians and even for Americans. So I think that's something that people like us and even individuals, I have some friends who are interested in helping just spread this information, and maybe that will be with speaking with government or speaking with funeral directors. We need some type of manual that we can all read and understand and be able to work for us. So it's getting there, but based, I think, on this conversation already, we can see that it's a really gray area at the moment. So on a similar note, do you want to get this question that just came in as well? Also, Wallace Finch, thank you for all your interaction today.
Wallace Finch would like to know, what are the options for body donation in Canada if the local medical university is not taking any more bodies? I don't know if either of you could. I don't know if either of you could answer that question.
Well, I just know a little bit about organ donation in terms of signing the back of your driver's license and having that available. And you can donate your body. What happens once the bodies have been used for the medical purpose? They are all cremated afterwards, and then there's typically a ceremony for that. I haven't heard of anyone sort of being full on organ donations, but you know, I think a lot of people who want to donate their organs are not sort of 24-year-old men in perfect health. You know, they're older people, and their organs may or may not still be useful to other people. So just something to consider.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We have a program that actually strives to facilitate the act of bequeathing your body to research or science, which is an extremely difficult thing to be done and very, very, very misunderstood by the general population. There is a huge sum of institutions and universities and such that do offer body donation as a program of study and such. But quite honestly, their programs do get full. And in fact, I was speaking with the University of Waterloo today, just this morning, in fact, because we oftentimes facilitate bringing deceased people to them for donation. In fact, my own great aunt is there as we speak, being studied and such. But they do have a capacity of how many individuals they can accommodate. And typically, with respect to whole body donation, the university oftentimes will take possession of one's bequeathed body for a number of years. And they do not have an unlimited supply of ability to do so. So again, if an individual wishes to have their body bequeathed to research or science, it is by no means easy to do. And a significant amount of planning needs to go into to that element, first by becoming pre-registered with a particular organization. And so, you know, again, we tried to bring the public and the organizations that take individuals after death together and facilitate being the people to do so for them. So we get inquiries all the time. In fact, we mailed a package out this morning to a gentleman to help him understand how to go about having his body donated, though there's no guarantee come the time you die, much as Janet said about organs, that your body can actually be accepted even if there is space, because there's requirements that your body has to be successfully checking off the boxes of dying of particular diseases. So very misunderstood and needs to be definitely expanded, you know, in terms of education.
All right, well then I think we're definitely going to have to make a blog post about that and let everyone know a bit more information in Canada and in the US about donating to science. In the US, it seems maybe a little more easy, so maybe we should invite them over to pick up our dead if they need more, because apparently a lot of Canadians want that, and it's
they do.
Yeah.
We get probably 3 inquiries per week of people pre-planning, trying to discuss that. The truth and reality is that one's body must be delivered to the university typically within a 24-hour period after their death. So there's not one particular scenario in funeral service that we do that's more intense and more time sensitive than bequeathal of deceased people. It's very intense.
Right, because that leaves very little time for any form of visitation or any service.
Quite honestly, the reality of having a medical certificate of death signed at the place of someone's death, having the body transferred into our care, having the death registered at the municipality, who typically works office hours, we oftentimes work in a 24-hour scale to achieve this. So it's very, very intense.
Wow, it's so interesting how like you feel like you're trying to do science a favor, you know, and really do something you know, useful and pertinent, and then it actually is a really hard process to go through to try to do something so helpful. I mean, so it's a catch-22.
It very much is. So there's practicality that comes into play, and also science, right? I think that a lot of people forget the fact that our body is a mass of science. It's a biological mess when we die. And so we do not have time on our sides to be able to afford 3 days to have a doctor sign a medical certificate of death, have the death registered, and have their body transported sometimes hundreds of kilometers away for donation.
Okay, great. So Janet, maybe you can answer this question. And we actually borrow this from our last event when we spoke about American funeral law. And at Daniel R's on Instagram asked, is it legal to use burial alternatives like Capsula Mundi's tree pods or Bios urn and such?
Yeah, there's a lot of new, I want to say trendy, but there's a lot of new products coming out that are facilitating green burial, and everyone thinks that they're on the market today, and you could pick one up at your local cemetery, but apparently in the States that's not the case. And I was wondering, what's your experience?
Well, the one sort of new technology that I was dealing with back 5 or 6 years ago was the folks in Sweden who were doing sorry, the name escapes me as well, but it was like basically freeze drying the bodies and then sort of shaking it a lot. So it would be, you would have cremated remains basically, and then you'd bury those. The one thing for me, natural burial is like the simplest thing. So when you start talking about new technologies, and I think you use the word trendy, they are trendy. And with the baby boomers who want to do things a little bit differently, it's a great fit for them, perhaps. But for me, the natural burial is really just trying to do things in a simple way. So I personally am not a huge fan of sort of things that require technology like that. It's called cremation, what I was talking about before, the Swiss technology or the Swedish technology.
Right.
And are you did you? Sorry, what am I going to say? Biocremation. Was there any talk about that when you were with the Natural Burial Association?
About the water cremation.
Water cremation.
Water cremation. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that has come since. That's what you really need to look at, like one of the things like cremation is not that environmentally friendly. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to burn a body at that high temperature for a long time.
Yeah.
Just like cremation, you've got chemicals, now you've got, shaking. So to me, it's just like the best way to go is the natural way.
Yeah. And for those of you, did we explain green burial yet? Briefly. So essentially green burial means to be put into the ground, generally with no embalming fluid. If there is embalming fluid, it would have to be organic. And generally you're put into a very simple pine, indigenous wood casket or a shroud with made of organic material. Also something that's not really discussed a lot is that the clothing that you're wearing should also be of organic material. So wearing polyesters and materials like that is not generally great because it doesn't really biodegrade as easily. And then you're put into a grave, and there's no vault. Where in the States we see a lot of vaults. In Canada, I think it depends on the cemetery space. So that's, for those of you who are not aware, is the idea behind green burial.
And Nathan, are you noticing consumer demand for things like biocremation and water cremation, so fireless cremation?
Yes, we've definitely received inquiries. There's a specific kind of niche person who inquires about these things, right? And they're pretty hardcore when it comes to wanting to do things a different way and in an alternative way. So we have been asked about this. We've actually explored certain options and being educated ourselves with respect to the process is called resumation, which is the form of water-based cremation, if you will. There definitely is a desire to become educated and aware of what's better for the environment. Even with respect to cremation, we have families ask us how do they regulate the emissions? Do we have to choose this crematorium, or why have you chosen these crematoria for us to work with? And we have chosen them based on those exact environmental elements.
Yeah, and I think there is, there's sort of a toss-up with cremation about its environmental friendliness while we're still on this topic. And we did an infographic about the environmental effects of funerals and burials in America. And cremation in that context came off as being pretty negative. But at the end of the day, when you actually look at the numbers, cremations isn't as bad as a lot of people may say it is. So if that's the option, because it is one of the most affordable options for a lot of families, and it actually is not as bad, as some people try to make it out to be. And especially like you mentioned, a lot of that also depends on the condition and the age of the retorts of the machines. So some of them are really, really energy efficient, and they're not like letting just anything leak out into through the stacks essentially. So it's important for sure to know that you're going to a place that is up to current standards and is environmentally friendly.
Exactly.
Okay, we're just trying to see what the live feed is bringing us. I think we should go to this funny
question.
one. So this again, this one's from our American one, and it was one of the more popular questions that was being asked, and it's one of the funniest ones. And we don't always get a straight answer, but here it is. So at Megamia329 on Twitter and Cecilia Rodart on Instagram both want to know, can you legally leave your body in a field to be eaten by vultures or other animals? Who wants to go first?
That would be a big no.
Why not?
I mean, there's a lot of discussion, I think, out of this comes from people's cultures, right, and places around the world where in specific cultures, back in the day, this was and is still a very natural means of people disposing of their deceased loved ones. The truth and reality is that we live in a very civilized culture, right, that's bound by a lot of regulations, a lot of laws, a lot of health concerns and otherwise, and I think that if that should suddenly become a viable option, that there would be a pretty large outcry from the public. As Janet, I'm sure, can attest to, the movement towards achieving full green burial sites has been enough in itself in terms of challenge to lobby government organizations and otherwise to comply. So definitely not going to be suitable for Canadian culture, at least in my lifetime, I don't think.
Janet?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the burial, is like there's a little bit of the ick factor there, that, there are sites that, whether they're real or not, the Watch Me Rot or SeeMeRot.com and all these sorts of things that are sort of, that create headlines and news and buzz about it. But I think I agree that it doesn't do the people who are working towards natural burial any favors. We need to be sort of the people who want to change the funeral. Like, it's a very powerful, entrenched industry who have a lot of clout. And so for the people who do want to offer an alternative, and I think, it's, we spoke earlier that, it's cheaper, so they're not making the same margins. There's so many reasons why the conventional industry are going to put a slowdown on this, that we all need to sort of be reasonable and work together to try and create change.
Well, with that in mind, and speaking to our last question about body donation, I know in the States there are body farms where you can donate your body, and they tend to leave the body out to study decomposition or see what the effects of animals eating corpses are. Do we have anything similar in Canada? Do either of you know?
I haven't heard of anything like that.
Okay. Well, yeah, so it's essentially, in a way, donating your body to science, because it's donating it to forensic science. And that allows them to further understand, for example, when there's been a murder or a body is found, in a forest or somewhere remote a few days later, it allows them to understand what the body's actually going through during that decomposition process, and then hopefully be able to, figure out, how someone died. So it's really cool, especially if you're into, things like CSI and forensic science. So we'll definitely give you guys a follow-up on that. We have a lot of notes to write after this for things to tell you all about. What time is it? We have 5 minutes left. So maybe let's ask really quickly about having that. I think that's interesting.
Okay, sure. So
maybe for Janet.
Janet, another question from at Graveyard Picnic on Instagram. They want to know what the property issues and laws are with having a grave on your property. So if you want to bury a family member in your backyard,
So first of all, I guess, are you allowed to do that? Because she's asking, do you have to maintain it? But I think maybe the first question is, are you allowed to just bury a body in your backyard?
Yeah, well, so the answer is no. And the reason, so what I think she may be referring to is the care and maintenance fund. So every cemetery in Ontario has to have, to start a cemetery, you need $150,000 to sort of seed your care and maintenance fund. And then every burial in a cemetery, they take 40% off the top of that to put in the care and maintenance fund. And the reason for that is, I guess in history, old sort of church cemeteries, when the people have all died out, they weren't kept up, they weren't maintained. So that's why the Ontario government put that stipulation. So there are funds there to take care of the cemeteries.
Okay, interesting. Nathan, do you have any experience with this? Has a family ever requested to bury a loved one back home?
We've received sort of some media inquiries and such, I guess, just based on the same topic. And so, yes, the answer is always no, that you need to be buried within a registered cemetery. There's been interesting dynamics, exactly what Janet spoke of as well, with respect to old churchyards and such. As we know, a number of faith groups, the United Church, Anglican Church and such, in modern day is selling off a lot of their properties and amalgamating their churches. And lo and behold, there are cemeteries that are sort of left up for grabs. A lot of these cemeteries have been amalgamated into municipal cemeteries because they do need to be maintained.
So what you're saying is we can buy an old church and run our own cemetery.
The cemetery would still be registered, if you will, through the means that it needs to be, but you do see these things coming up.
That's very interesting to note. I will check my latest real estate agent's listings.
I can tell you where a few of them are.
Cool,
Perfect.
Awesome, well, that's so cool.
Another idea that we had that we thought was great was turning brownfields. So areas that have been contaminated that may not, that would cost a lot of money to clean up. Again, thinking really, really long term, but putting burials in there would be a great way to revitalize the land and, to have a positive spin on the land after it's been degraded.
That's so interesting. So we really need a few pioneers that can, few pioneers that are really great with politics and some people who, a few lawyers and I think maybe we can try to get a nice grassroots movement going. So if anyone's interested, send us a message, let us know your ideas and we'll see what we can figure out and buy an old church. Why not? Let's all raise some funds and do it.
Yeah, because we really want to get into the cemetery business. So
I don't know if he's joking or not, probably not.
On that note, so we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Janet, do you have any projects that you're working on? Anything that you'd like to promote or anything that you'd like to end with?
How we can keep in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll post it. I'm a speaker at this upcoming natural burial exposition, which is happening at the Unitarian Church in Mississauga. It's in November, so that's just something that I'm volunteering to do. Yeah.
I will maybe see you there then.
Yeah, we'll definitely share the event and hopefully we'll be able to be there and tweet about it. What about yourself, Nathan?
Exactly that. The Natural Death Expo that Janet was just speaking of is coming up in November, and I will be a speaker there as well. I think that if we revert back to the beginning of our conversation today together, that expo is going to be a very, very, very positive space where a huge amount of discussion and growth will come out of that experience to I think be a catalyst to push us all forward into new movements. So I will be available there and can certainly be reached out to on my personal LinkedIn profile, my name, Nathan Romagnoli. I will also have a personal website that will be launched in the next couple of months as well. And I also have a bio on ecofuneral.ca.
Great. We'll be putting up links to all of your projects as well on our blog, and so people can, and on YouTube as well, so people can get in touch with you that way as well.
So thank you to everyone that tuned in live. I think we had a few issues with our Facebook live feed. It was the first time we tried it out. We will have it working more properly next time. So thank you all for tuning in, and please send us your suggestions for the next TalkDeath event. That will most likely be in November, and let us know, what do you want to learn more about? What do you want to talk about? And we promise to get a next awesome episode for all of you.
Now, you can always leave a comment on our blog, leave a comment on Facebook, or tweet at us. We're always online and reading your suggestions.
Yeah. So make sure to visit us at keeper.com for our blog. Just put /blog and check out our app on the App Store and on Google Play. Just look up Keeper and make your cemetery awesome by using the app.
Nathan and Janet, stay on the line with us. To everyone else, we will see you next time.
Thank you.
So much.